Gentlemen. I don't know why this is here. Good evening. I'd like to call the regular Cumberland Fire Committee meeting to order. I begin with a roll call. Commissioner Hayden?
Present.
Commissioner Hogan?
Here.
I'm here. Commissioner Cucciani?
Present.
Commissioner Picone?
Here.
Commissioner Jones?
Here.
Commissioner Santoro?
Present.
Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? During this moment of silence, I would like for us to acknowledge Cranston firefighter Jeremy Wall, who passed away off duty last week. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Chief, one question. Do we know how old Jeremy Wall was? 49.
He leaves a wife and 3 children.
It's very sad. My thoughts and prayers are with that family. Okay. I know we're supposed to go into executive session. Commissioner Hogan?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to move the executive session further down on the agenda this evening because I know we have a representative from the auditing firm, I believe, and some members in the audience that may have something to talk about, and I don't think we should make them stay here. It could be a 2-minute meeting, it could be a 2-hour meeting, who knows, so
Okay.
I'd make that motion.
Thank you. So the motion is made by Commissioner Hogan, seconded by Commissioner Jones, to move executive session to the end of the meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to a vote. All in favor of moving executive session to the end of the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may. If the intent is to have the auditor present earlier, you might want to, I see there's other issues on the agenda, you might want to move the audit report right up to the next
Item of business. Is there a motion on the... Commissioner Santoro makes a motion to move the auditing report up to the next item on the list.
Second.
Is seconded by Commissioner Picone. All in favor of moving the audit report presentation to the top of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. I'm sorry, was there a discussion? Okay. All right. Good evening.
I'm assuming you'd like me here.
That would be fabulous.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know who I am, as I wasn't here last year for the presentation, my name is Mary Sahadi. I'm the senior partner with the firm of Haig Sahadi and Company. I've been an audit partner since 1987, and I've been with the firm for 40 years at this particular point. So it's been a long time.
Thank you, Mary.
So we're here to talk about your financial statements this evening, and what you have in front of you are three or four actually additional documents that were as a result of Commissioner Paul's request. So we can talk about those in a minute, but initially let's talk about your financial statements. So your financial statements are based on governmental accounting policies and procedures, and they're broken down basically into 3 components. What you see initially at the start of the statements themselves is the section that's referred to as the MD&A. That's the management discussion and analysis. And that is supposed to be the district's ability to write in layman's terms a summary of the activities of the district over the last year. Now, there are certain components in that MD&A that are required by the standards, and so if you picked up your district's financial statements and you picked up another district's financial statements, you're going to see that that MD&A is very familiar, you'll see the same components in each one of them. There are some comparative data, so as you know, when you look at your government-wide financial statements or your governmental funds, you're going to find that you don't see any comparatives. So in order to compare something from the current year to the prior year, you're always having to go grab the prior year in order to be able to do that. If you were a nonprofit, you'd actually see the prior year financial statements, comparative data included in the statements themselves. But governmental statements don't allow for that, and so you see the comparative data in the management discussion and analysis, and the concern that I'm sure each of you have when you're starting to look at some of that data is it's really condensed. So the information with regard to the comparative nature is very condensed. So hopefully I can help you walk through some of that as we go forward. The next statements that you see within the document itself are the statements that are referred to as the government-wide statements. So you will see the statement of net position as well as the statement of activities. Now, for a district this size, the difference between your governmental statements themselves, which really is the basis of your budgeting process, yes?
I apologize for this. Could you reference us to a specific page?
Oh, certainly.
Sorry, it's on the table of contents. It's on page 15 through 17, statement and net,
Thank you.
statement and net positions.
Thank you. So the difference between your statement of net position and your statement of activities, which is referred to in the governmental world as the government-wide statements, and those statements, which are your governmental fund statements, which are really based on your budgetary process, are any liabilities or assets that bring you to the concept of full accrual. So here for the district, what it really means is these statements include your net pension liability, and they include your other post-employment benefit liability. For the assets, they mean picking your assets up as an asset of the entity, as opposed to it being expensed when you purchase it. So you purchased this past year the ladder truck, and you expensed it. It was a budgetary item, you expensed it as a capital asset when you purchased it, and you're showing it as a deduction, really, right, one of your expenditures, when you show your revenues and expenses. For these statements here, you are showing it as an asset. So what does that all mean? It means that back several years ago when GASB 34, so we're up to GASB 80 now, but back when 34 was implemented, which is many, many years ago, the Governmental Standards Board was trying to standardize all financial statements. So they were trying to take every government and standardize it with IBM and GM. And so when Moody's and Standard & Poor's and all of your rating agencies looked at your statements, if they looked at your government-wide statements, they would be comparable to the private entities that exist in this country as well. And these are all based on U.S. standards. So you'll see in the report letters that we always talk about the U.S. standards. So again, really what's different here is your pension liability is shown as a liability, where on your governmental funds it is not, and your other post-employment benefit is shown as a liability, where on your governmental funds it is not. So, moving you forward to your governmental funds, which is really the funds that are most important to an entity like yourselves. Starting on page 19, you'll see your balance sheet, and then on page 20, your basically profit and loss as we know it in the outside world, but in the governmental world, we know it as the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. So what I want to bring forward to you with these statements is that the most important thing to look at is to look at page 20. And when we look at page 20, this is where I, as an outside auditor, and you as commissioners may have a concern. Because when you're looking at this particular page, you're going to see, and if you compare it to the prior year, you're going to see that your expenses are greater than your revenue by $490,000. Now, if you go back to 2017, Or if you look at the worksheets that I gave you just this evening, you're going to see that the same thing is true in 2017. What that means is that you have utilized all of your equity. So you have now spent, basically, all of your equity on expenditures in the current year and the prior fiscal year. And at this particular point, your fund balance, your unassigned fund balance is negative. Your total unassigned fund balance is negative by 282. So there are some adjustments for
That's this year.
receivables and payables. But this year's net loss was 490,000.
Where was that? Where was
And
that?
that's shown,
Yeah, what page?
that's shown
It's on page 20.
On page 20.
What line?
Bottom
Would be
line. Bottom
basically
three
the
lines.
third from the bottom. So you see that
Third
you
from the
started the year with some equity, right? You
Okay.
started the year with $207,000 worth of equity, but utilizing the loss or experiencing the losses this year, you now have an unassigned fund balance. So if I take you to the worksheet that I gave you this evening, which I think is probably helpful, because you can see it, the 17 and the 18 on a comparative on the same page, you can see where your largest expense that is increased over the prior year is the overtime. And I believe each of you know that the big reason for that, for the most part, is that you have a number of people that are out on injured on duty. So, you know, it's unfortunate that they get injured on the job. It's unfortunate that you've got to incur the additional overtime expense as a result of them being injured. But what you're looking at here is that if this trend continues into fiscal 19 and then further, you could potentially be in the situation where you're going concern. You're not having enough revenue to offset the expenditures that you're incurring. Even here with the expenditures, with the revenue rather, you've got some one-time revenue that you're not going to have in the next fiscal year. So for an example, you have a note proceeds for $100,000 on that capital lease that you received. So that $100,000 is unique to 2018, but won't exist in 19 and didn't exist in 17. That's helping you in 18, or you would have had a $590,000 deficit. So I just want to bring that to your attention. I don't want to scare you in the sense of, oh my God, the sky is falling. But on the flip side of that, you should have a concern that your expenditures are exceeding your revenue. And that's based on your budgetary. That's based on cash. That's based on receivables and payables. That's not based on adding all the pension liabilities in. That's not based on adding all the other post-employment benefits in. To take that one step further, and one of your commissioners had asked the question, how do we get from that governmental funds to your government-wide? If you look at the columns that are to the right on that same worksheet, you'll see that on the revenue side, there's really not much in the way of adjustments. There's a small adjustment for deferred revenue. It's $10,000. And then there's that $100,000 that I just spoke about. But when you look down on the expenditure side, your biggest change is the pension change. So when we're looking at the change in net pension liability, and that liability is based on a liability that's calculated by a third party, and it has to do with several of the assumptions that the state has incurred in its plan. So the assumptions have to do with the age of your firefighters, it has to do with the interest rate that you're receiving, it has to do with the mortality tables, and so they look at that information on an annual basis after the measurement date, and they calculate what the liability is going to be, the net pension liability. And so that liability, based on the standards, so we're looking now at GASB 68, based on the standards, that liability is recorded in your government-wide financial statements. So this is, thank you. So this is how your pension expense, if you will, goes from $700,000, right, that you paid. That's the employer contribution that you paid out. It goes from the $700,000 to $2.6 million. So what we're concerned with is the $700,000. And you can see that what I did for you, because in most cases, your audited financial statements are only going to show total personnel services. But what I did for you here is I said, okay, how much is salary? How much is your accrued vacation and sick? What did you spend in incentives and stipends, overtime, and so on, health insurance? And then the other liability, which is really negligible when you talk about the liability, is the GASB 75 liability, which is your other post-employment benefits. So that's your accrued vacation and sick time that you would owe, and in most cases, it's just health insurance that's owed to retirees. So, and this, yes. Yeah,
sorry.
stop me anytime.
You said age, sorry, interest rate return on, for the,
We're
I know
talking-
that the GASB 75 you mentioned is a 43,000, 42 something change.
Right, so that's primarily they look at the age of the participants.
Yep.
And they look at their marital status, so they're gonna look at whether they have a single plan or a family plan, okay? And then they're gonna look at their potential for retirement, and they're gonna calculate what that liability is, because this is the health insurance. For the most part, it includes some life and dental, but for the most part, it's the health insurance that you are going to be paying out on the retirees beyond their date of service.
And that's tripled. That's gonna triple in 1 year. Wow. I'm not, almost quadruple. Okay. So you said in your book, you mentioned about, I'm sorry to go ahead, Madam Chairwoman. You said GASB 84, 86, 89. Do you see those numbers going up and getting worse?
Well, I don't see necessarily the pension and the other post-employment benefits getting worse, with the caveat that you're not funding your other your other post-employment benefit liability right now. You're not funding it, so you're paying as you go. So if you were to fund it, the interest rate would be lower, because they're going to look at the discount rate when they calculate the liability itself. So you could help yourself to some extent if you had the extra cash to fund that liability,
Yeah.
which you don't, so that's not going to help you. On the pension side, it really is, and I have a real hard time sometimes with this whole pension expense, and I'll just use it to compare it to maybe your personal lives, right? So if you all had some kind of investments this past year, and you looked at your investment statement on December 31st, and you said, yikes, how am I ever going to retire? Because the stock market was really low, right? Today, the stock market has rebounded somewhat. That's like your pension liability. They have to look at it at a point in time. So you might have a really bad pension liability at one point in time, and 3 days later, it could be to the good by $500,000. So it is definitely based on interest accruals and interest earnings, and it's also based on unrealized gains and losses. So it's looking at what the assets, the fiduciary balance is that is in the plan itself. And so you're in the state plan here, so your reliance is on those assets that are being invested in the state plan.
But this line item here is for retirees,
The,
not for the MERS.
the pension is for the MERS. The other post-employment, the $42,000, is for the retirees.
Okay. And we can't control MERS.
That's correct. That's correct. But my point is that liability could swing
Sure.
significantly from one year to the next.
Go way
and
down to a quarter what it was? That'd be
One
great.
would hope, but I'm really not sure. Right.
Thank you.
So those are the differences, and I know that was one of your questions that you had sent the office, so I thought this would help explain it, because you can see it more in a table format than me explaining it in the financial statements. It is actually included in the financial statements past the governmental fund statements. If you were to look on pages 21, 21 and 22, in the accounting terms that we're required to report on, this is a summary, basically, of what I just reduced to one small column. And a lot of it has to do with, when you're looking at the pensions, there's a concept of deferred inflows and outflows, plus there's the pension expense itself. And so what I've done for you in this particular worksheet, which is, beyond the scope of what we're opining on, I thought that might help you answer some of your questions.
Let me ask a question if I could, please. I know you mentioned it goes with the flow. It could go up and it could go down. Have you looked by any chance at the past 5, 6, or 7 years of what has been paid into that pension plan or the responsibility of the district? I don't think it's gone down one iota. It may have leveled off somewhat, but it stayed at a very high level. Would you agree?
I would have to do the analysis because you have 4 plans here, and I would have to sum them for you.
I'm talking about MERS.
But I would, the MERS, because you have 4 MERS plans. So I would have to sum it for you, but I would agree overall. And in your particular case, your participants, your employees, your staffing hasn't really grown. So, of course, one of the other factors when you're looking at this is what's the number, what's the employee count that's being reflected in this analysis. In your case with the district, it hasn't really changed from one year to the next. You may, add an additional firefighter, or, one may retire, but overall, if you look at your gross payroll, your salary expense, it actually went down by almost $7,000 from 2017 to 2018. So,
And in the prior years, it probably went up.
You're pretty much stable, in terms of...
That 1 year
In the
was
1
a
year,
was
right.
a
I have a
level
1 year snapshot
1 year
here.
level funding.
Right, I have a 1 year snapshot here. So going on with regard to your financial statements, the difference, just to bring it to your attention, you have very little activity, but there's a concept in your governmental financial statements of major funds and non-major funds. So if you have a grant or some type of other activity, that would be referred to as non-major funds in the world of governmental accounting. What you're really looking at is your general fund, and that's the fund that you budget every year. So that's the fund that you spend most of your time looking at, and when Diane is reporting to you on a monthly basis, that's the fund that she's referring to. Beyond that, in your financial statements themselves, will include the notes to the financial statements. I won't say that they're boring and have a lot of information that nobody ever reads, but they do go on for a number of pages. I believe they start on page 23 and they go to... I guess it doesn't really matter. They go to page 49. So the whole gist of the notes to the financial statements is the first note of every financial statement, so whether they're your financial statements or whether they're the town of Cumberland's financial statements or any other financial statements in between, you start with the summary of significant accounting policies. So you want to tell the reader, basically, how you report your financial data. What is included in the basis of accounting, what is included in some of the definitional type expenses. So you'll see encumbrances discussed, you'll see each of the fund balance types discussed, and so the summary of significant accounting policies in layman's terms is probably your way of describing the policies of the district. And then as required, we're required, or you're required, to include specific notes. And those notes include everything from defining your cash balances to your fixed assets, the additions and the reductions, your depreciation. They require you to include your note analyses. Now here you generally have TANs. Those TANs are taken out for short-term borrowing, and then they're due shortly after fiscal year end. So in this particular case, I believe you had a $500,000 TAN at June 30th that came due on July 11th, and you immediately paid it off. So the only note that you have outstanding here is that $100,000 on that piece of equipment. So that's the only note you have. And that's payable over, I believe, 60 payments. Then beyond that, the state requires us, or the federal government requires us, to include all of the narrative with regard to the pension plan. This information, because you're part of the state plan, is provided by the state and is included in your financial statements, as well as each and every participant in the state plan. So if you were to look at any other set of financial statements, all of the information with regard to their pension plan is included, utilizing this exact same format. Subsequent to that, and also part of GASB 34, so we're going back in time, there was a section that was always required that was considered required supplementary information. That required supplementary information, if you've been commissioners for some time, you'll know that back in the day, it was only the general fund budget and actual. Since then, there's a number of retirement schedules that need to be included, and the standards require us to report on 10 years' worth of the pension liability, and then net pension costs, the pension liability, and other related data or ratios. This standard has only been in play for 4 years, and so what you're seeing in your document is 4 years' worth. Eventually, you will have 10 years' worth when the standard is, at that point, 10 years old. This information, again, is also provided by the state as it relates to the plan. Flipping all the way back to, I don't see it, I should really look in the table of contents, is the budget and actual. And that is probably one of the more important schedules for the district. So that's going to be on page 48. So on page 48, you will see the budget as adopted and then amended if there were any amendments, and then the actual. So you can see based on initially, you had a balanced budget. You had anticipated your revenue and expenses to balance, if you will, and the results were that small shortfall in the revenue, so not significant, $45,000, but a $230,000 shortfall on the expense side. So that's, and again, we've just talked about this a little bit, that $543,000 in the personnel services is as a result of the overtime and your engine on duty. Your basic other personnel services, as you could see from the page I provided to you earlier, have not been over budgeted. So when we're looking at healthcare and other personnel services, they came in pretty much online. And then the only other thing that, or the only other expenditure that you spent more than you had anticipated was the line of training. And, you know, that's just a matter of, I'm assuming the timing that programs were available. I don't know whether we're talking about, and maybe the chief can answer that better, whether there was an academy, and so we had, you know, firefighters in the academy, and that pushed the training up higher. The academy sometimes, and certainly I'm not a professional as to the hiring of firefighters, but my limited knowledge over the years is that sometimes the academies are difficult to get firefighters in, particularly if you don't run your own academy, and as a result, you have to get them in when there's an opening. So going back to what I handed you this evening, there were several questions that were asked, and I tried to answer them. I think we've talked about what's on page 1. On page 2, and I apologize, I don't have the pages numbered, but on page 2, when we're talking about the other post-employment benefit, although we saw earlier that the liability itself increased by $42,000 over the course of this, yes. The handout, if you go to page 2 of the handout.
Okay. This one, the satellite.
And this is more for informational, because I tried to answer the questions in some sort of order, and then that way everyone would have the answers as well. If you look at the top square, you actually had benefits that you paid in other post-employment benefits, so health insurance basically to retirees of $132,000. That was the expense this past year. That's shown in your financial statements on page 57 if you want to trace it back into the statements themselves. The pension liability, as we just talked about, it's the MERS, it's all part of the 4 state plans. That's shown in your statements on page 50 to 53. But here in summary form, you can see that your liability increased. So again, based on the assumptions, the interest rate, the return on investment, and other factors, the liability actually increased by $2.5 million, and the current employer contributions into the plan this year were $703, seeing the change that you saw earlier in the other schedule of $1.8 million. So that's kind of where that came from. The next question that I believe was asked was to describe how we arrive at the change in the net position. So, again, I took what's in the financial statements on those 2 reconciliation pages that follow the governmental fund statements, and I reduced it to summing it to basically the top items, if you will. So, looking at last year, we had a deficit, so a negative fund equity of $6.2 million. And at the end of 2018, we have a negative fund equity of $9.2 million. The majority of it came as a result of the increase in the pension liability. We also talked about the increase in the OPEB, that's the $42,000 we've been talking about. Your accrued vacation and sick time increased slightly. Flip the page one more, it'll be page 3 of that document, yes. So these are just, this was just a handout to answer the questions of Paul. So, you know, the biggest thing here that I'm going to bring to your attention one more time, just because I feel it's my responsibility, is that the district had a current operating loss of $490,000. So that's important to keep in mind, because we've got to turn that around going forward, or at some point you will have no equity at all. On the next page, the question was asked with regard to deferred inflows and outflows, and what made up the $1.5 million that is actually being shown on your financial statements. So what I did here for you is I broke out how that $1.5 million is calculated, and all of this goes to a sophisticated, complicated, however you want to describe it, calculation of your net pension liability, and it's amortized over a number of years. So each one of these years, 19, 20, and thereafter, you know, each of the years, those are the amounts from each of those districts that will actually be added to your pension expense. So this deferred outflow will actually decrease each year as these amortization amounts are added to your pension expense. So again, just part of the calculation that the state does on behalf of the district for the pension plan. So, any questions?
Know any magic? We can come up with $400,000?
So the interesting thing is that, you know, looking at your statements, you, other than payroll, you don't have a lot of expenses. So if you look at materials and supplies, you don't really have a lot of expenses. So with the exception of, and the same thing with revenue, so you rely primarily on property taxes. So the only way, realistically, to increase your revenue is potentially if there's a mechanism to add some fees. So whether the fees be inspectional fees, I know you have call box fees already, I believe, but maybe inspectional fees, so maybe revisit the fee structure of the district and see if there's a mechanism to increase your fees or to add a fee for maybe something that you're doing already for your residents of Cumberland, but that you could potentially charge for. Because with the exception of that, particularly if you look at the front page of my handout, you really have nothing besides payroll. I mean, the materials and supplies are not a significant number. So, I mean, you could, obviously try to cut back on some of that, but clearly a lot of it is completely in relation to the firefighters and their needs on the engines, or, I know there's, the issues with their equipment, and, nowadays making sure that they're safe and they have the right training equipment, and that equipment is, up to standard, so to speak. There's a few grants out there that maybe you could think about applying for that might be available to the district with regard to uniforms and training. But aside from that, yes.
Last year, we went through the arduous process of asking for over the 4%. I think we're the only charter in the state, if I'm right, Ms. Morris, that limits us to 4%. And
The only charter?
the charter, we're the only charter in the state that limits us to 4% increase per year.
In terms of fire districts, maybe, but that is a state law for all municipalities and public agencies.
Yeah.
Probably some fire districts can go over that cap.
Yeah. And we tried, I think everyone put in, you, Diane, Kelly, Chief, probably hundreds of hours trying to get the Auditor General to, let us do that. And that's probably the only option we probably have to get a one-time
Yeah.
increase. I mean, they asked us to do some things that we just couldn't do. I think, right? That was the bottom line.
I mean, definitely the IOD is an issue, because even if you look at the insurance reimbursements on that same page, in 17, it was 182,000, and in 18, it was 333, so that's a direct relation to the payroll problem. So you've got payroll that you're paying out, that you've got individuals that unfortunately are out on injury, and then compounded by the overtime.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Mary, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're
for
welcome.
the work you and your firm did
Thank you.
on this audit report. I'm not happy seeing them and seeing those numbers in black and white, but I know a lot went into this, and I appreciate your presentation. I hope we all have an idea now about
Where you stand in-
where we stand
exactly.
financially in this district, and we're going to have to put our heads together moving forward to figure out how we can solve this problem. I know that we do have more firefighters ready for the academy, which hopefully will alleviate some of the overtime issues. But it's not, it won't solve the problem immediately. This is a year.
Exactly, it's a year out, because they've got to go through the
They have
academy.
to go through the academy, and then,
And then
by
you're
the time they're
compounding
finished-
that to some extent with the healthcare costs.
Right. So,
So, and that's another issue. I mean, I don't know, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the details to see if we even had them in the financial in the audit work papers, but, maybe a consideration to renegotiate your health care. I don't know, like I said, I don't know who your carrier is, but there are some options out there to carve out things like prescription drugs. There are companies that will, if you have Blue Cross, they're certainly one that, I don't want to say gouge municipalities and districts, but they tend to be one of the more expensive ones, and it's a good benefit for your employees, but it might be time to either try to negotiate the premiums with them or carve out the prescription drugs. That may help. So there are a few things that you could potentially do that may save you some money on the expense end of it, because you're right, if you've got new firefighters in the academy, they're going to come out with the costs in addition to their salaries, but the other costs that are related to it.
Right, exactly. It will, on one hand, we'll knock...
You save on the overtime,
We'll save on the
right.
overtime, but on the other hand, we're looking at, 25 to 30 years of
Healthcare costs.
healthcare costs.
Right,
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But I appreciate you having me here this evening.
One quick question, if I could, please.
Sure, of course.
Has your firm, besides now doing Cumberland, have you provided these services to any other fire districts within the state of Rhode Island in the past 5 years?
In the state of Rhode Island.
I'm not looking for a specific answer, but yes or...
I don't believe we have any other fire districts in Rhode Island. Right off the top, I know we have 2 in Massachusetts. So-
If you had, I was just going to ask for a comparison, if that was generically possible, between Cumberland and the other districts, if you had provided those services to other Rhode Island districts, which you have not, so...
I have not. What a lot of districts do, now you're a much bigger district, so you're really more like a fire department, even though you're a district, as opposed to some of the true districts that are out there that have volunteers. So their payroll is a lot less because they have volunteer firefighters as opposed to it being a true district. Who provides the emergency medical services here?
Separate town agency.
Because what some communities are trying to do is combine the efforts between EMS and fire departments, assuming that you can get firefighters that are certified paramedics, and then you can potentially save because they can serve on both the rescue unit and on the ladders.
That's something the chief and I have discussed, and it's something we will pursue in the future. I think the chairwoman and I have on the same page with that.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Compared to the previous reports, I think this presentation was fantastic.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking
appreciate
time
it.
for my beleaguered, obscure questions.
It's okay.
You made sense of my nonsense questions, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. And in any interview, if you have any questions during the course of the year, you can either contact me directly or through Diane. I'd be more than happy to look back through the work papers to do whatever analysis are necessary to try to help you with your budgets going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Okay. Moving on, we shall move back to general announcements. Any general announcements?
Just the chief, fantastic job, the fire. February 14th. But you're going to cover that during the chief's report, I'm sure, but
I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Sergeant Matt Alves and Patrolman Kenneth Henneberry of the Cumberland Police Department, who made an extraordinary save and pick of a baby and the mother off the roof of that porch. Our guys were able to get in and get the dogs after, but the human life was the first, most important factor, and they were able to get to that mother and child and get them down to safety as Engine 1 was pulling up. So their actions have led to a commendation from the police department, and I think certainly we should send our acknowledgement to them also.
Yes, we will. And if I could just take a moment to remind everyone that this was a tragedy that was averted And we are very lucky that those particular police officers were there to assist, because we could be talking about something absolutely different in it, and that is a concern to me. There were no working smoke alarms in the home. This is a reminder for everyone to make sure that everyone has working smoke alarms. And if you're a landlord and you're watching this, you know, there are 10-year tamper-resistant alarms you can put in your buildings, and people cannot take batteries out of them. So that is something to consider. Number two, one thing to remember is to have a practiced home escape plan. Their initial exit was blocked. They used the other exit, which was onto the roof. So at least they did have a secondary exit. That's another very important thing. Everyone should have practiced home escape plans. So, and I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank the Valley Breeze for putting a good report out on the fire. So, Ethan Shorey, I'd like to send a shout out to him. They did a nice job covering that fire. Any other general announcements? Moving on. Approval of minutes from the January 22nd meeting. Is there a motion on the table to approve the minutes from January 22nd?
Motion approved.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Picone.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Hogan. Any discussion?
The chief's report, I'm not sure if the right sees, but. No, I'm sorry. In the section where it says, line 56, 57, 58, 55, in the chief's report, it mentions mutual aid and my belief. I'm not sure how this person knows my belief, but I stated that I believed, that I felt we were going out more than we were coming in, and the discussion ensued regarding the reporting. The way it's written here, it looks like I can't do math. I did pass math class a couple times. So I'd appreciate it if we could add a line that there was a discussion regarding the system of reporting. As I recall, the reporting of the in was including EMS reports, and reporting out did not include EMS reports. Therefore, my comment as listed in the minutes is completely inaccurate. I don't know how we fix that. I make a motion that, do I have to make a motion that we add that, or do we just table it so they can fix it?
I'm trying to find it while you're talking, so I'm sorry.
Oh,
I would suggest that whatever sentence or sentences you want to replace, you make a motion
okay.
and replace them with the words that you believe you said, and then that's how you would amend the minutes.
All right.
What line are you
And
on?
there's line numbers to help
Yeah.
you.
Line 54.
No, 55, 56, 57. 7, so on the minutes for the meeting we had on January 22nd, 2019, on line 56, 57.
I believe Commissioner Santoro starts on line 57.
57.
Yeah, new business. So I stated that I felt we were going out more than coming in.
Right.
And then we had a discussion about the way that the chief's report comes out of the computer. We're not saying anybody's fault, but the way this is worded, it just looks like provided 89, received 225. Santoro believes it's the other way around. If I make a motion, we add discussion ensued regarding the methods of reporting.
Right after that Commissioner Santoro states his belief that the Cumberland Fire District provides more mutual aid than it receives, and then the sentence that you just
Yes,
stated.
yep.
That's fine.
Yes, please. I'd like to make that motion.
Motion on the table to amend the January 22nd meeting. Is there a second?
I will second.
Discussion? I'm sorry, seconded by Commissioner Kutsiani. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the change to amend the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Jones, were you going
No,
to?
no, I'm sorry.
All right.
I jumped the gun.
Okay. All in favor of amending the minutes to the meeting reflecting the need to add, and a discussion was held, say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 7-0.
Thank you.
All right, back to the original motion to accept the minutes, to approve the minutes from 122 as amended.
It's all good.
I make a motion to accept the minutes for January 22, 2019 as amended.
Second.
By Commissioner Kutsiani and seconded by Commissioner Santoro. Is there a discussion? All in favor of accepting the amended minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Approval of minutes from the 12th roundtable meeting. Is there a motion on the table to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Santoro. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Hayden. Any discussion?
Unfortunately, yes. There's an error on the very last line, which says adjournment, and I'm sure it's just typographical. Vote was taken, passes 7-0. Motion to adjourn passes 6.0, 6-0. Line 66 and 67. And just make a motion to change the 6 to a 7.
Somebody left. Somebody left.
I did.
Commissioner Kutsiani left, so it was 6-0.
So we should change the vote passes to 6-0, because he couldn't vote if he wasn't there.
There are two, it looks like there are two votes there, so, on the same issue, adjournment.
That is
Yeah.
correct.
So
I think,
one of them's wrong. If he was,
just
if,
take out that. I would just say, delete on line 66, vote was taken, passes 7-0.
Right.
And leave motion to adjourn, passes 6-0.
I make a motion to what Kelly said.
Motion to amend the January 22nd, the January 12th roundtable meeting by Commissioner Santoro. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jones. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the amended minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Approval of minutes from station tour meeting on the 12th at 7:30 a.m. Is there a motion on the table to approve the minutes?
I abstain.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Pacone. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Hayden. Discussion?
Madam Chair, I'll recuse myself also. I did not attend. Abstain from voting, I should say.
Nor did I. So who is present?
I was not there.
Commissioner Kutsiani, Commissioner Hayden, Commissioner Jones. Okay. So, gentlemen, all in favor of approving the station tour meeting minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So that passes 4-0. Okay. All right, next section. Retirement of Diane Carolosian. Diane, did you want to say anything?
I wasn't planning on it, but I will.
Sorry, I don't mean to put the spotlight on you.
I actually had intended to retire last January and came back, helped out a little bit. Never really did find a replacement.
Just get the microphone so I can make sure I hear
Oh,
everything.
okay. I had intended to retire last January. I came back to help out with the transition, and the transition turned into coming back as a part-time finance director. We were not, at that time, able to find a replacement, so I agreed to come back on a part-time basis. But I would like to retire this time. For real. For real.
And Diane, if I may, what is your attempted retirement date?
June 1st.
June 1st.
I have been discussing with the staff the transition. I have been gradually moving some of my duties around the office, things that I did that weren't entirely finance-related, but I've been working on that. We have sent out some resumes for a part-time clerk to replace Pam. Some of those resumes are coming in with some pretty qualified people, so we may decide to speak with them to see if they might be interested in part-time finance as well, or even a full-time person that could do part-time tax, part-time finance. So there's some options out there where we've just started this process and we're working on that right now.
So if I could suggest the Personnel Subcommittee meet with you regarding the expectation of any changes
Absolutely.
in duties or ideas about, I know we did this last year. This is a repeat performance from last year, and we
It is.
couldn't really find anyone last year, so
Maybe we go about it in a different way this year.
excellent suggestion.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on getting your wish.
Yeah, it's time.
I certainly appreciate everything that you've done for
Thank you.
The Fire
Well,
Committee, and we
I've always
can
loved my job.
we can do this in June.
Okay,
We don't have to talk about it right
okay, all right.
Madam Chair,
now. Commissioner Santoro.
when I received the agenda, I reached out to the chief by text, and we've already set up a meeting. We're going to set up a meeting to get the ball rolling,
Good.
to go into the office when he has time. And Diane hopefully has time on Thursday. We can sit down together and aggressively work on this. We have 4 months and try and get a plan, and then myself, Tim, and Mr. Custigliani can get this, I think Diane has some good ideas and tremendous loss, obviously. But like you said, we should look at some novel ideas in terms of the overall staffing down there and make it a definitive decision this time as, I know Diane mentioned recruiting at the salary we're paying is going to be,
Difficult.
difficult at best, for that particular position. They're getting $100,000 in other departments, and we're paying 55, 60, and Diane got paid probably half of that to do twice as much work.
So sometimes there's some ways to reorganize to be able to do it, so we're looking into all the possibilities.
Yeah, and I would suggest, and that's exactly what I would suggest, really taking a look at the organizational chart, do an org chart, and figure out how you can adjust so that perhaps, you're right, have tax collector finance person as a combination position.
Right.
But I think it's a good idea. We've been in the business for 5 years. It's time to actually look at the organizational chart and see if we need to make any changes, so.
Right.
I would also suggest the Personnel Subcommittee take a look at that.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. We know that we don't have much time on this, by the way.
Not at all.
It's March. 3 months. Less than 3, it's almost March. 3 months. Okay. All right, next business is the status of not engine 1, it's truck 1.
I thought so.
As I mentioned in the commissioner's report, we had a catastrophic failure with truck one. And when you look at the substructure of an aerial, you have the frame rails that the wheels are bolted to, then the torque box is bolted to the frame rails. The aerial is mounted to the torque box along with the outriggers. That's the basic structure to keep the aerial stable in operation. There's a multitude of channels and square tubing that makes up the torque box that the turntable sits on. At some point, and without an enormous amount of dismantling, the torque box is broken. So when you go to use the aerial, the whole subframe is flexing on the chassis. We brought it back to the local representative, sales representative, which is Bulldog Fire Apparatus in Hopkinton. They examined it. They had never seen that happen to a truck. The only way to fully diagnose what the problem could be would be to take all the compartments off, take the ladder rack out of the center of the truck so that they could get right back down to the basic shell. And they were looking at upwards of maybe 15 to 18,000 to get it dismantled so that they could see what was wrong with it. But they do know there's a serious flex because the hydraulic tank is part of the torque box, and the hydraulic tank has a crack in it and it is leaking. So the expense far outweighs the repair of a 19-year-old truck. So with heavy heart, I brought it back, not knowing what I was going to do with it, but decided that I had a pretty decent tandem axle chassis and I had the need for a tanker. So at first what I thought was going to be just an off-the-wall idea, I consulted with our lead mechanic, Ted Vecchio, and Mr. Vecchio was here tonight. He actually has the truck as we speak today. Because of the snow and weather, we just had a little bit of difficulty getting them the truck so that they could look at it. There is a viability to using it as a tanker. Now, you might think, why do we need a tanker with hydrants? Well, we have about 25% of the town that doesn't have fire hydrants. And if we put a 3,000-gallon tank on it, with the 1,000 gallons that we have on engine 4 and the 750 on engine 1 and 5, we now have 5,500 gallons of water to make an attack with, which is significantly more, 3,000 gallons more, than what we currently have. Could mean the difference of a save, a stop, compared to a total loss. So it's our investigation right now, and we still have some diligence to do. You know, Ted wants to put the truck up in the air, take a good look at the chassis rails, take a good look at the suspension system. We just did engine work on that truck. That's what disappoints me so much, that the torque box let go. The engine and the transmission seem in very good shape. The tandem axle will carry 3,000 gallons. It's just a matter of putting costs together and finding a funding source. But as it stands right now, that aerial does not come out of the bed. I talked to Bulldog to see if there was any revenue, if they took the pistons from it to have for spare parts. They wanted nothing to do with it. They said the amount of time to take it apart was not worth it to have them sit there waiting for that particular aerial to need pistons somewhere else in the country that they'd have to ship it to. So what we have is basically a pumper night right now with an aerial that can't come out of the cradle.
Does Ted want to buy it? Ted, no? You don't want to buy it?
Question, Chief, I know it's a preliminary on your research on it, but that's a Quint apparatus that has a pump,
That is, yeah.
truck one.
Yeah.
So that if this come to fruition where you could figure out if it's viable, would that be considered an engine now, that, with a tank,
No, it'd be considered a tanker.
tanker?
Yeah.
But you could you use the pump, is it 1250?
Yeah. I mean, there would still be some attack line on it, but we'd have to be cautious because you're talking 24,000 pounds of water weight, and you're talking the weight of the tank itself, and we'd have to balance that out with the braking and carrying capacity of the frame. So how much hose we carry on it would determine how much area we had left to work with.
Thank you.
Chief, what is the, how many more years before that truck is needed to be put out of service no matter what?
As an aerial,
No, as a truck, as a fire apparatus, 25 years before they're...
well, there's no regulations on tankers.
Oh, okay.
That's, there are auxiliary vehicles, and you get credit with ISO when you can maintain a constant water flow, which is the subsequent part of
That's
the
excellent.
thought process with the tanker. If we can maintain 650 gallons of water flow for 1 hour in all parts of town, then we stand the good probability of reducing some property taxes for the non-hydranted people. The tanker itself isn't listed in NFPA for any lifespan that I know of. You don't know of any either, right? So it's an auxiliary vehicle like a brush truck. That's why there's a lot of the military vehicles that are brush trucks from the 50s and 60s still. They're rugged trucks, and as long as you know how to drive a standard transmission, they're still serviceable. So the lifespan, as long as the truck keeps running, doesn't come to an end as a pumper does that has a particular life of 25 years in reserve according to NFPA.
Would you pull off the whole ladder apparatus that lose that weight?
We would be back down to a cab, the pump, and a chassis, and we would start fresh.
Some hose and couplings, the whole bit?
Yeah.
Okay. And it would still stay, it'd be located at Station 5?
Yeah, it would go back, yeah. Because the thought would be for particular non-hydranted districts, one member from Engine 5 would jump in the tanker initially, and the Lay Road, Lippert Estates area,
Sure.
they would be going there with it.
I'm familiar with Lippett's. I remember Lippert Estates as a volunteer back then, driving the yellow truck.
Well,
Remember Jeff?
that's the whole...
Dana? Remember those days? Dana?
That's the large-scale thought process in my plan. Financially making it work, we still gotta work on.
I think it's a great idea, Chief. I think it's,
Another bake sale.
And we're not, we haven't even started, we're not even at the discussion phase yet of how much to cut it apart, so.
Madam Chair? Chief, would it be feasible, and it's just a layman's term or question, to turn it into a utility truck instead of using our ladder truck to chase the rescues around all over town?
To use it as a utility?
Put all the equipment that you have on the ladder one and use that instead of sending a ladder truck to a car accident or... It's just a question. Sorry, I don't know. If
That's
it's feasible.
that's a possibility, and that has been discussed, and that's not out of the question yet. We were waiting for Ted to come up with a viability plan, which he just started on today to see. Either way, that aerial's got to come off, but I'm not going to continue to carry that weight needlessly.
Thank you.
Excellent suggestion. Okay.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Santoro.
Under communications, I know Robert's rules, I remember reading it back in before, we can add something to communicate, we can add something to the agenda if we agree to a majority vote. I have a letter I received. Do you want to address this letter during this section of communications?
I was hoping to address it at some point in time, yes.
Okay, so if we all vote, I guess, you're the chair, you decide.
All right, thank you for giving me that opportunity. Is there a motion on the table to allow an addition to the communications section of the agenda?
Yes. Make the
So,
motion.
Motion by Santoro. Commissioner Santoro, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Picone. Any discussion?
I think you would have to indicate what communication you're referring to.
Letter from,
Letter
I
from,
know, but I think that would have to be in the motion, my suggestion.
I make a motion to enter the letter from Ms. Morris into the communications section of the agenda tonight.
okay. Commissioner Santoro makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Picone. Any discussion? All in favor of adding this piece to the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Commissioner Santoro, would you like to begin?
Yeah, it's with great sadness that I read and receive this letter. I think I can call you Kelly. I fought for you last month to not have to go through the process of whatever we discussed, but I think it's a great loss to the fire district, the years you served with the endless hours with bringing the group together, the 4 districts together, and then the years we argued back and forth and got things done. And can we refuse to accept this? I mean, I think we have to act on recruiting a new solicitor. We're never going to get somebody at $125 an hour. That's not going to happen.
Yes, you will.
What?
You will.
Think so?
Yeah, most municipal solicitors, that's what we get.
Okay.
That's
Will you-
not unusual.
Will you help us with the transition so we can,
I've indicated, and thank you for your kind words, Commissioner. In my letter, I have indicated that I'm not going to leave you hanging. I will stay for a reasonable amount of time while you transition to someone else.
Okay.
So,
Madam Chair, would you like the Personnel Subcommittee to work with Ms. Morris on this, or?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll be in contact with you so we can work on this process as soon as possible.
Yeah, we'll have to look at a job description ad somewhere in some newspaper, or, I don't know, where do you advertise for lawyers?
I think that even, I don't know if the Valley Breeze would allow it, but a press release or an ad, and then I can contact some people that I know. There's plenty of municipal attorneys out there that would be happy to help, I'm sure.
Okay. I would also like to publicly thank you for all of the work you have done, and for the past 4 years, four and a half years, almost right from the start of this committee. And I think because of your guidance, you have brought us all along. I know that, you certainly taught me an awful lot about running a municipal government, so I really appreciate that. And I am very sorry that you are resigning, but I understand, and I congratulate you on your new position, and I think that's pretty exciting for you, and it's a big stepping stone, and I would imagine that the demands of that particular position are going to be great.
Yeah, I've learned over the last 2 months that it's a lot of work. I'm enjoying it, and again, I appreciate your comments. I really enjoy working with the board, but sometimes we have to make difficult decisions in our professional life, so this is one of them.
And that is true, unfortunately for us.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any further discussion?
I would like to personally thank Ms. Morris for her dedication during the number of years that she's worked with the fire district. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring to your attention, Madam Chairperson, that there are other organizations out there that, with this board's indication, that I may inquire of them through the Rhode Island Bar Association and the Rhode Island Association of Justice, which is another lawyers' organization, that I could send out at least an indication that there is a job availability looking for candidates, as soon as we get some type of job description and where to send resumes. But I don't want to do that without your permission.
So I would advise Commissioner Santoro, as the chairperson of the subcommittee, Personnel Subcommittee, your suggestion. And I think that in the meantime, we need to work with Kelly in looking at the job description and then writing the ad.
If I can follow up, I agree with Commissioner Kuziani. In fact, I believe the Bar Association has a government lawyers section that might be helpful, because you really do want someone who deals with municipal government,
Right, yeah.
open meetings, public records requests, all of that kind of stuff.
Yep,
So
so,
we'll be calling a meeting, the personnel subcommittee, next 2 weeks or so,
okay,
to discuss the two positions.
very good, thank you. Any further discussion or comments? Okay, moving on to new business. Chief?
It was a pretty busy month, with
would say so.
443 responses, as you can see. The fire alarm receiver, the new Keltron system that the building committee for the public safety building finally agreed to purchase. The work of installation started today, I'm happy to report.
Oh, that's wonderful news.
It looks like probably a 2-week installation period. They're hoping that weather cooperates with them during the roof work section of it, where they have to install the antennas and run the wiring down. It's going to be a state-of-the-art 2019 system that will work well for us into the future. So,
Luckily, they
that,
didn't try and set up the antennas yesterday.
yeah.
Just saying. Okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
So that part has been completed, and, well, not completed, but that paperwork has been completed, and the installation has begun, which is a great relief for me. They're attempting to occupy sometime late March, maybe early April. There's a lot of, and Commissioner Hogan probably knows much better than I, there's a lot of transfer work that has to be done on the police side, which is going to be very time-consuming, that most people are unaware of. And they have to do what's called a hot cut for the 911 phones, the business phones, the radio system, and the Keltron system in a simultaneous event. So they have to shut off the current system and transfer to the new system as seamless as possible and as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And there's a multitude of reasons for that are very technical, that even I got lost on some of it, so.
Can I ask you a question? Is there any arrangement where, during this small window of transition, that if somebody dialed 911, it could bounce to the state police, who then could...
Well, everything initiates through state police, and that's one of the things that they're working on, that it wouldn't be transferred out of the 911 system until they actually physically had somebody from Cumberland, or they could reroute it to Lincoln or Central Falls, I believe, were the other two sites they were talking about during this issue.
Yeah, because I'm sure that, you don't know what's going to happen in that 2-minute window that they have to transfer everything over, or however long it's going to take them, that our citizens are able to access some type of emergency rescue if they needed it right at that moment.
Right.
Okay, good.
So all of that has been thought of, and it's going to happen at some time when it's all coordinated together, so.
Okay, I was just wondering if you had known.
It's just,
any particulars.
there are a lot of, there's a lot of things that have to transpire simultaneously, not just for us, but for everybody in total, so. We talked about the High Street building fire. Our luck of good saves kind of ran out at that one. You've indicated the lack of early detection was our biggest detriment there. And, you know, we've beat the horse and we've got it out there. We are receiving phone calls from concerned people that have no idea if their detectors are operating, if they're in code and date or not. So we are getting out. The message was delivered, the message was received, and we are responding to those questions initiated by the public. So,
Excellent, good. I'm really happy to hear that, because
Yeah.
that was exactly, that's what you use, that's how you get messages out. You
Yeah.
have to-
yeah, and you're absolutely right. This could have been a much more detrimental
Oh, yeah.
conversation that we would be having. We talked about the catastrophic failure. In working on monthly reports, I just from habit, would just report on the prior months and then determine that that doesn't do us justice, that from now on, I'm going to report on events right up until the day that I create the report. So if I create the report last week, it will be current up until last week. And the next report will start at where I cut off and go right up, so that we can be current in talking about current issues, rather than being in the past and probably having a resolution for some of the items that are on my report, so.
Well, that's a nice thing that you're doing. I don't think it's,
The recruit process, the hiring has been done. We have 2 recruits that started yesterday at the Rhode Island Fire Academy. We have 2 that will be coming in April 1st and starting for April 8th. The member that has been out on IOD for a period of time has been approved from the Disability Subcommittee. His formal hearing is March 6th. If he gets approved on March 6th, I'll be hiring a 3rd person to start on April 8th, so that we will have, by the end of the springtime, we will have all of our vacancies filled. It will be 5 would be the total.
And that person would start the academy, what, June?
No, April 8th.
Okay. So
Yeah, if I get, and I'm gonna go to the hearing, if I hear that he's been approved for a disability pension on his hearing date, we will cut his time that following Saturday at the end of the pay period, and I've already talked to the prospective candidate. He would have enough time with his current employer to be able to begin on April 8th.
Is you're okay on the list, Chief?
Yeah.
So we'll get 5 coming off the list, 4 or 5 coming off your list. You have a excess?
Oh, yeah, there's still, even with this 5, there's, I believe, 6, 7 others that are still beyond the list.
Thank you.
So Chief, in the past, we've talked about the ones that are going to be assigned to the grants, the safer grants and non-safer grants. Should we assume that the first 2 going in are going to be the full-time employees, or are we going to wait till the end of the year to decide?
No, according to the safer grant, all vacancies have to be filled, the additional employees. So the last 2 that are hired will be the safer grant employees.
Okay, that's how we're going to resolve it now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, 'cause I know you discussed with
Yeah.
other districts.
And if there's in the 3-year grant period,
Yeah.
if someone retires or leaves, it just moves up. That one person moves up. It's always the last 2 that are the safer grant.
So the numbers you sent us by email are the 4, I think it was Jenna Andrews, and then there was a second, I can't think of the second person's name.
Andrews, Bowe, Grimes, DiGiulio. I haven't looked at it much, but
Okay.
those are the 4.
So the first 2 are going to the academy starting yesterday?
Yesterday,
Great.
how many weeks?
12.
And, do you
They'll
know
be
what-
simultaneous for about 6 weeks, the first and second class.
So around the the week of the 13th of May. It's either the 13th or the 20th of May will be the final week.
Yeah.
And then graduation will happen probably the end of that week. I don't know.
Yeah, I can pull the roster out and give you the exact dates.
That's fine, at some point.
It was just 12 weeks away. I barely look at the end of the week right now.
Yep. What?
They can overlap the classes, the academies?
They are this time because there's so many candidates.
So how's that work? The classroom, they just do the field work, stagger how they could do that, you know?
Well,
I'll let you know in the April meeting after I witness it, but I believe they're going to get the first group through all of the classroom work and have them into the field area for the last 6 weeks. When the second group comes in, they'll be in the classroom. The first group will graduate as the second goes out into the field work.
Chief, I have a wholly different question, and it may be totally off the wall, as often my suggestions are. I noticed that the old Berkeley station is no longer being used, and it's going to be sold or for lease or for rent from the Manville Collaborative, whatever it's called. I know that they used to house the old ladder. Remember, Dana, the ladder?
Yeah, ladder 10, that was a center mount turntable.
Yeah.
So the profile was much lower. I don't know if the door height would allow truck 1 to go in.
Is it worth
Or ladder
pursuing?
one.
Is it worth pursuing, even looking into that structure, as opposed to the Albatross on the corner of 116 and Mendon, as an
Well,
alternative?
We could look into it as an alternative. I don't believe he wants to sell the property. I think he's
Well-
just looking to lease the property.
I thought that the collaborative, Northern Rhode Island Collaborative, owns it.
No. The gentleman that owns Baker, Haywood Baker,
Yeah.
Mr. Donaldson owns that building.
Okay. I
He
mean,
just leased to,
even leasing it, if he's willing to give us a 3 to 5 year lease, as opposed to what we're putting up with at Station 2 right now. Is there something that
I don't know what the inside of that building looks like.
it's been I guess it's been storage or whatever?
Yeah. You know,
I don't know, it's just something
We'd have to look at it and explore it. It could be like when we went to look at the gas company.
Sure.
It looked like a real good idea, but when you started putting the numbers down, it just became
Sure.
ineffective
I'm just
cost-wise.
wondering, trying to avoid, if we're gonna incur some huge expense when Station 2 does have a problem, and that building is brick, if it's something that, I'm not sure which committee or which people you want us to go out. I'm willing to go out with you someday and look into it, if I know you're busy as all can be.
Well, it's a thought. I seen the sign on it, for a few weeks now. We just have no finances to work with right now, so I haven't even started to explore that option of it yet. So, and the last item, one of the last 2 items, we have CO detectors on all of our med bags, and they're little disposable, I hate to say throwaway because they're an electronic item, but they don't have replacement batteries. They have a shelf life. When they're done, you just buy a new one. In this case, it saved the firefighters at Station 1 because they had the bag out doing their truck check and the alarm activated. So initially they said, oh, it must be malfunctioning, but by protocol, they went outside, they cleared it, it stopped alarming. That's different. They came back in, started doing the truck checks again, went back into alarm. So their engine wasn't running, the only thing that was running was the heaters. They shut the heaters off, went back out, cleared the alarms, came back in, nothing happened, turned the heaters on, goes into alarm. So we called our service company, Kafin company came down, they put a ladder up, and as they're walking up, they're looking at the fire because the firebox had completely burnt out. So they shut the first one off, put it out of service. I said, well, we might as well check the second one while we're here. And as he's walking up to the second one, there's pieces of steel blowing off when the fan kicked in. So both fireboxes had burnt through. And it was naturally during that cold snap back in January. So I called Frank Stoic at Highway and asked him if he had something that could help us out. And he came in with this monstrosity of a torpedo heater that heated that apparatus floor for the 5 days that we needed it. And they put the CO meter right next to it, and it got 0 parts per million out of this unit that was older than me. But it ran so efficiently, and it kept the apparatus floor warm, kept everything that needed to stay at temperature on the rescue as far as meds at temperature. So it was a great help, again, working interdepartmentally in the town. And the last thing, Diana and I have forwarded our prospective budget to the Finance Subcommittee. We have a meeting scheduled next week, of next
Wednesday,
week.
yep.
So we're moving forward with that. And it's going to be time to pedal fast because the budget process is going to be coming up, and we have some difficult decisions to make.
Correct. If I could just make one comment regarding your story about the CO, and you said exactly what people do. The alarm went off, and everyone said, it must be a malfunction of the alarm. And this is the problem with carbon monoxide. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. And when an alarm goes off, a lot of people just ignore it. So fortunately, there was a protocol.
Yeah. And they followed it.
And they followed
yeah.
it. So again, the need for even CO alarms, because if they didn't follow it, if they just thought it was a malfunctioning CO alarm, then who knows what could have happened. So, you know, it's just a thing people do. They think the alarm goes off, it must be malfunctioning, instead of there must be a problem.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe we have to work on the public with that. Thank you very much.
But as best as we can all recall, those heaters were 31 years old.
Yes.
So we got extraordinary service out of them. And
Yeah.
to the installer's credibility, he not insisted, but he somewhat advised me that what was happening is the take-up air was coming from the atmosphere, which was okay before we had the exhaust systems that extracted diesel fumes. And what he's found in multiple communities is when those fans run, they pull a lot of air to get all of the particulates out of the atmosphere. They're engineered to change the air twice in the space. So it puts a negative pressure on the furnaces that are installed. So to alleviate that, we had to core the building and put fresh air intake from outside the building. So now the combustion area is completely separate from the apparatus floor, which should hopefully get us at least another 30 years.
That would be great.
Was it yours, Chief Semino? Was it yours? The heaters were yours?
Any other? Yeah, that's, Stan says it, so it's, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
The finance report? Do we need to, we just had an audit report. Is there anything new and different other than what the audit report indicated?
There isn't anything new and different right now. We are paying very close attention to expenses. We are paying very close attention to not spending if we don't need to. Right now, we're on track. We're at 60% of our expenses. That looks good for now. Mm-hmm. We just never know what's going to happen between now and the end of the year.
Right.
As the chief said, we're working on the budget, and it is a process. So,
Okay.
Diane,
okay. Yes.
the question I asked you, and you re-corrected me about the 2017 people that pay ahead, they pay the year in advance?
The
The prepay taxes?
Some people do prepay their taxes. We have some taxpayers that leave the country for a few months.
Yep.
They're worried about their tax bills not getting paid on time, so they will come in and say, all right, well, if my tax bill is going to be at least as much as it was last year, I'm going to pay at least that much, and then I'll be back in time if there's a balance due. So when they prepay that, we can't include that as income in this period, so it will just show up as an asset, a prepaid.
And do they use the tax rate for that year?
Yes, we will use this, we will say, your bill's not going down, we know that.
Yeah.
So they will usually pay that same amount. Sometimes they add a few dollars. We let them pay whatever they want. We don't really tell them what they should pay.
What's that, like $2 million, I think it is?
No.
No, how much is that, 193,000?
No, we,
I can't find the number on my sheet.
you had a number in that question. I don't know where that came from. You might be referring to people that pay in June after the bill comes out. That bill that will come out this year, the 2019 tax bill, is for our next fiscal year. Because the bill comes out around the second week of June, people begin to pay their bills right away. And usually by the end of June, we've collected, I think last year we collected $1.8 million. It wasn't that, they're not prepaying, it's just that it's not income that we can include in this fiscal year. It will be income for the next fiscal year. Was that your question?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how they get reminded to pay the difference, that's all.
How what, please?
How they get reminded to pay the difference between the tax rate from 2017, 18.
Okay, yeah, you're talking about maybe one or two people, too.
Ah.
They'll just get a bill, they'll get a balance,
okay,
or
so it's
they'll
not like
just,
it's-
they'll get their original bill in the mail, and then when they come back to the country, they will see that, okay, I know I
They
paid
owe about
$100 and I owe $5.
$10.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was a much larger number.
No,
I
no.
apologize.
Yeah, on the escrow that the mortgage companies were starting to see, you probably already said this, but I forgot. Do they pay quarterly, or,
They do.
so that's...
They do not pay annually, but they pay quarterly and they pay on time. So we receive, I think last quarter, hundreds, maybe 300 checks that had to be processed. Torn apart, folded, deposited. It's a lot of paper. But that's been helping, I think, with people that, maybe weren't paying their bills on time or couldn't pay their bills on time. So,
Diane, my number came from page 16 of the audit. It says advanced tax collections.
advanced tax collections, it's not, right, that's not people prepaying. It's collections in the month of June for the next fiscal year. Because the bills go out in June, we can't, that's not income for that year. It's not income for June, it's income for the next fiscal year.
Yeah. And that's where I got the 1.8.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
that's a lot of money.
It is, it's,
Yeah, but
you know
it's
what, that's
for
typical, though.
FY19, yeah.
That is typical, that a lot of people get their
20,
bills in the mail
actually.
and they come in and they pay in full.
So 1.8 million, and then we add 4% onto that, they get sent out another, you know what I'm saying? So, I hate to beleaguer this, I know it sounded like it was 1 to 2 people, but 1.8 million people are paying, I know June and July you pay the...
Before the bill is due,
You just pay,
right?
Yeah, they're paying,
They're
right.
just paying before the bill is due.
oh, okay. So they're paying before the bill is due, but the rate is
The
already been
bills are
set.
due July 15th.
Yeah,
But they've gotten their bill.
and
Right.
They've gotten their bill, and they're paying it before it's due, versus a couple of people who are going away for a couple of months and are prepaying.
Correct.
alrighty,
Okay?
that's what that means.
Are you all set with that?
I'll accept the, as I've been told, yes.
Okay. Resolution,
Oh, wait, I make a motion, we accept
say, thank you. Motion to accept the Chiefs and Finance Report.
Yep,
Is there a motion by Commissioner Santoro?
yes.
Second?
Second.
By Commissioner Jones. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the chiefs and the finance report, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. All right. Second last item on the agenda, resolution number 3 for 2019, authorizing the business manager to pay Cumberland Oil Company an amount not to exceed $6,810 to replace the unit heaters at Station 1.
Madam Chairperson,
Commissioner Santoro, Guziani.
I think the chief has already explained that bill. I would make a motion to approve that bill.
Okay, great. Motion to approve by Commissioner Guziani,
Second.
second by Commissioner Santoro. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the, authorizing the business manager to pay Cumberland Oil, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Any public input? Chief? Please. Absolutely. Come to the microphone, please, and state your name and your address.
Ernest Semino, 15 Sanford Avenue, Cumberland. I just wanted to ask, and it's probably the chief would know, I got lost in the trying to follow it. The SAFER grant, men, chief?
Yes.
Are they providing you with any additional manpower to the department? Two additional? Okay, good. All right, good. Thank you.
We arbitrarily...
That's all I wanted to know.
Sorry.
We petitioned for 2 men, and we were just looking at the prospective overtime reduction, and looking at taking on 4 men might have been excessive, so we decided to go 2 men this year. If it works out, I'm not going to apply in the 18 grant, which is open now. We'll see how these 2 work. If it works out, then in the 19 grant, which will ensue a year from now, we can do it again, if need be. But we'll work on these 2 and see how it goes for the time. And thank you for your help on High Street. He still has it. He didn't jump the fence, but he came around. He helped stretch a line, and he provided very good insight to the State Fire Marshal on the initial scene overview. Thank you, Chief.
I asked that question, Chief, because I, as you know, was the first day witness there that day, and I think that it's good if we're moving in the direction to get more manpower out of that apparatus than it does. So that's why I asked.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Motion to go into executive session by Commissioner Santoro. Is there a second? Second. Second by Commissioner Hogan. All in favor of going into executive session to discuss a collective bargaining agreement, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes 7-0. I'd like to take a 2-minute break or a 3-minute break to allow the changing over of the microphone and